am recording. You can start.
All right then. Hello everyone. Welcome to SpecterCast. It's a monthly podcast series of the Arlen Specter Center at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. This is a podcast where experts talk to experts on various matters of general and topical interest, and this is number 3 in the series. I'm Chris Pastore, Professor of Transdisciplinary Studies in the Canbar College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce, and Assistant Provost of Faculty Development for Classroom Pedagogy and Nexus Learning. And I am your host today for the podcast. This is, as I said, episode 3 of SpecterCast, entitled Pandemic Pedagogy. Today, we are delighted to have with us my dear friend and colleague, Professor Rob Fleming. Rob is a professor and director of the MS in Sustainable Design, as well as the author of several books on the topic of sustainable design. His latest book, Sustainable Design Basics, co-authored with Sharon Jaffe and Mark Carlin, offers a new method to reach net zero energy designs. Rob was the co-host of the award-winning podcast, Ecoman and the Skeptic, along with yours truly. Welcome, Rob. Could you give us a little background?
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Chris. It is like old times. And a little bit of background about me. I was at Woodstock in 1969, right, where I did not swim naked in the puddles. So I just want to be really clear about that as we get started. And a little bit more background. I am an architect, and I have come to realize that I am also a change agent. And I find that most of my life has been spent helping people deal with change. And I think this topic today is one of the major change points in our civilization.
That's a good point. So let me start right into the grilling of you here, Rob. Okay. You and I have been involved in distance education for quite a while. I started in 91, where I had to use the post office instead of the internet. You started in 98. We've seen pedagogical research and technology grow over time. Do you have any thoughts in general about the progress of distance education?
Oh my God, it's like anything else, remarkable. I would use the term exponentially amazing, but you as a mathematician would probably object to that terminology. But what we do see is a meteoric rise of digital technology. And Chris, I think a lot of people don't really understand that this meteoric rise actually comes from some pretty significant technology developments. When you and I started, the hard drives, we didn't have good hard drive technology. We couldn't store video. We didn't have a really strong internet. We didn't have bandwidth. And the only reason that our universities are really functioning now is because of the platform of technological development that has occurred in only the last 5 to 7 years. And so these last few years have been really transformational in what can be done online, what is being done online. And now we've built a new platform to do some real innovation and some real amazing things coming in the next few years.
You know, related to that, and of course, the reason that this is such a topic of interest right now is COVID-19 has really shaken up industries, lines of work, and clearly higher education. What do you think the impact of this pandemic on university and college pedagogy might be?
Yeah, so first, before we get to that, I just want to say that this is a first world, super privileged discussion, right? We got a lot of people out there suffering. So let's just acknowledge that and thank all those folks for being out there. And then we have the luxury of discussing what can we do in higher ed because of this pandemic. So going back to my first part, the only reason we're also having this discussion right now is because of the technological innovation. And so there's going to be some downsides and upsides to this. One of the dangers that I see about this is that it's actually pretty good. That I think if you look at assessment and student learning outcomes from that point of view, objectively, it's pretty good. From an experiential point of view, it seems that, Chris, many of the folks seem to object to it. And I want to talk about that a little bit later. What's that?
You said many of the folks seem to object to it. Which folks are you referencing?
Many of my colleagues have been very unhappy with the interactions they've had with the students. They don't like looking at a blank screen, and they feel like their quality of their experience has been deteriorating as they teach online. But the pandemic itself has thrown us into this madness. And I think, Chris, you would agree that some of our most creative moments come in moments of stress. And I've noticed how over time, my colleagues have more and more said, but you know, this one thing was better, or, you know, this one thing that I was able to do is really better or different. Or, you know, Rob, this thing is not so, you know, maybe this is actually a good thing. Maybe we can actually do better or augment more with this online technology. So what we're seeing now is the beginning of the falling out of what's happening with the pandemic response.
All right. It's almost as though you read my script here, Rob, because the
Oh,
next thing I was going to ask you was about many of our colleagues have a sense of anxiety,
oh,
and as do some of our students, which you
sure.
haven't addressed yet, about this whole online teaching experience. What advice do you have for faculty and students about dealing with the anxiety of online teaching, learning?
Well, I think first of all, to be fair, I am an extrovert. So I generally am comfortable in front of a room, even in front of a room full of all of you, where all I can see are your names. I only have you to, uh, look at, Chris. So to be a little bit fair, I find that the anxiety for me is very less or lower, but mostly because I've been teaching for 10 years online. So I have made every mistake possible teaching online. Everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. And over time, through doing this a lot and through constantly innovating, I finally have figured out that I enjoy this methodology of teaching greatly, Chris. And I look forward to the moments when I get to teach online, partly because I'm able to engage such a larger audience. I have students from literally all over the world in my class right now of 322 students. And what I've become to understand is that my extrovertedness is now spread wider and I can have more influence and more impact. So for me personally, the anxiety is not there through experience and through my own personality. I've also found though, Chris, that folks that are introverts who were generally uncomfortable in class and would never raise their hand will use the chat box like crazy during my class to interact with me. And they're getting a conduit of interaction that I've never seen before with students that generally would sit quietly with their hands folded. And so what I tend to do is focus on those things and less so on the other parts. And a lot of this anxiety is just fear of the unknown and fear of change. And I think what we're finding is that, yes, it's painful. Yes, it's hard for a lot of people, but we're now getting up over the mountain and seeing unbelievable opportunities to make our on-campus teaching that much better.
Well, you're sort of hinting at this, but I wonder if I can get you to focus in. Do you have any advice for faculty who are concerned students won't learn as much from an online experience as they would learn from the more traditional in-class experience?
So Chris, this is where the interview is going to take a little bit of an awkward turn, because I think what a lot of faculty have not yet done, and I think they need to do, and I know you and I did this, when we got into online space on a regular basis, it forced us to question our on-campus teaching. And there's a tacit assumption that on-campus teaching is effective. And from what I've seen, that is not universally true. And I can prove this, Chris, because when I first started teaching online, people said, well, it's boring, Rob. The students will never learn. And this one person said this to me a lot. And one day I happened to be walking through Downs Hall. We know why it's called Downs Hall if you've ever been in there. And I looked in the classroom of this person who told me how boring online was, and half of his class was asleep in the back, not listening to a word that he was saying, and he was pointing to a PowerPoint that had to be one of the worst PowerPoints I've ever seen from a design point of view. And one of the things that happened to me, Chris, is online teaching made me redo all of my PowerPoints immediately. And what I realized is that my campus lectures were horrible. They were absolutely terrible. They weren't engaging, and they weren't getting at the learning that I thought, because of this magical thing called assessment that everybody hates. But what I did, Chris, is I assessed the same course online and on campus in the same semester with the same teacher, me. I had another professor blindly assess the course, and the online learning was actually a few percentage points higher than the on-campus learning. And I started to realize that it wasn't so much about the tech, it was that my on-campus teaching wasn't where it needed to be anyway. And I think that's what I hope to get out of this discussion, is a little bit more reflection on teaching in general.
So are you suggesting that, at least in the instance of this one individual you
Yeah.
told us about, the concept of boring more
Yep.
came from whether it was boring for the instructor as opposed to whether it was boring for the student?
Yes, Chris, and this is going to get back to the thing that I did not answer earlier, which is about student anxiety. I tend to think, and I love everybody that's in this room, I love you all, and I know you're dedicated educators, but you're very teacher-centric. You're very much about, how is my experience going to be lesser? and not so much about the students themselves. And I know all of you are going to send me hate mail after this, but I don't think that we're as student-centric as we like to think we are. And I think what I found is that dealing with anxiety of students online had a lot to do with the tools that we could use to engage students and get them to not have as much anxiety. And we'll talk about a couple of those techniques that we'll do during the course of the interview. Dana's
Well,
mad at me. I knew somebody would be upset.
let's just stick with that, Rob.
Yep.
How do you improve your student-centeredness,
Yep.
particularly in an online environment, but independent of that as well?
So one of the things that I try to use, Chris, is empathy. I try to stand beside myself while I'm lecturing, and I try to imagine how the students are perceiving the lecture. What kind of political point of view do they have? And I get to know my students through the chat box and through assignments, and I get to know that different students have slightly different worldviews. So for example, today we had a student named Talsia, who's a brilliant real estate student, and she tends to be a bit of a skeptic. And she was asking very tough questions like, why should we spend more for sustainability? How do we know if it's really going to work? How do we deal with that? And I started to realize that, and I had other students who were really hardcore socialists, right, who want to take all of our tax money and they want to spend everything to fight climate change. And both of those views are really valid. So what I'll do is I'll stop my lecture and start to say, well, Talsia, how do you feel about that? Or I wonder if Chris feels this way. And I'll start to actually call on students and get them to bring out those personalities and try to drive a real discussion from really different perspectives. But in order for me to do that, I had to really empathically connect with the students, understand their positions, and then call on them during class and get them comfortable talking in class. Starts with the chat box, and then eventually I get them to come off mic and actually talk during class.
So that ties into the next place I was going to go. There's always a concern, I hear this from many of our colleagues, that it's very difficult to build community when we've never seen the students face to face. Last semester was different. We were meeting the students and then suddenly we weren't meeting them face to face, right? Because it was a sudden change on March 13th. Yeah. This semester, it's likely many of us will be doing entirely online. And the concern that colleagues have expressed is it's going to be really difficult for me to build a sense of community. Meanwhile, you were just describing how you were getting to know your students through the use of chats. Are there other methods? I mean, one of the things we hear a lot is the importance of discussion boards. You have any opinion on those?
Yeah, so let me work into discussion boards for a minute, and I do find those to be valuable. You know, Chris, and again, there's a theme here that I think Donna Scott's going to hate me, but I'm not sure we're creating community on campus. I think we should use this discussion to reflect back on our communities that we're creating on our campus courses, because what I find on campus is because of all the social niceties and the rules by which we have to interact with each other, there's a lot of politeness. I find that online, I get a much better direct connection with my students and how they really feel. I feel like on campus, my students are very shy. They don't want to insult me. You know, they come up, you know, Professor, could I talk to you after class? And they're really nervous. And what I found with online is it cuts through a lot of that, and students are much more comfortable saying things like, oh, Rob, I didn't like that point that you just made. And so one of the things that I've been doing is at the end of lectures, I've been doing a little poll in Zoom, say, for example, cultural competency. And I'll have a poll to say, do you guys think that this lecture was racist? And I'll have 1 to 5. And guess what? 11% of the students thought that my last lecture was racist. I doubt that would ever happen on campus. So I'm getting a level of insight into my teaching that I will carry back to my campus. Now, in terms of that, so that leads into the idea of creating community. One of the things that I do, Chris, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to do this, I've been using this thing called, it's called WhatsApp. Have you ever heard of this? Mm-hmm. Or what's the one you use, Slack or something? These weird new things.
Got Slack here, we got WhatsApp, we got GroupMe.
Right. So I've been using this thing called WhatsApp with my students, and I think my students have come to regret it, because at 2 in the morning I'll realize that I needed to make my assignment harder, and I'll write them a little WhatsApp message. Oh, by the way, don't forget to do this drawing by 5 a.m. And what ends up happening is the students will write back, oh, okay, Professor, and they give me the thumbs up. And during the semester, using WhatsApp, the level of community that we've been able to generate has been amazing. I know Vidit and Dwani are here as part of, we're experiencing that. I never felt more connected to my students as part of a community than I did with something like WhatsApp or Slack. So before we get to the discussion board, Chris, I do recommend experimenting with some other tools that you can use to get closer to your students. However, I want to give a caution here. Sometimes students will forget that the professor is in their WhatsApp room and they will critique your course as if you're not there. So be prepared for levels of honesty. And this happened to me, Chris, is that the students forgot I was in a WhatsApp and they were like complaining about a lecture that I made that was not understandable. And then of course I came in on WhatsApp and said, oh, I see you guys had trouble with my lecture. Let's talk about that. If you're not comfortable with those kind of tools, then there are things like the discussion board. And I find discussion boards to be slow and annoying. But on the other hand, they give me so much deep insight into where my students' politics are, how they really feel. And if I can write good prompts, and this is the thing I learned, Chris, is you got to write good prompts for the discussion board questions. Otherwise, you don't get really good answers. And I think we need to be really careful about the prompts that we write and make sure that they are controversial enough or create enough space for students to have some real dialogue with each other. I don't rely on discussion boards entirely. I think that some of us, Chris, have done an asynchronous model for teaching, and I will say that I'm not a believer in a fully asynchronous model. You and I tried it. It was easy, but I was not very satisfying for me, and I don't believe it was satisfying for the students. However, the assessment showed that the students learned just as well in an asynchronous model than they did, which gets to the point about whether online is good for undergraduate in terms of community building and socialization. Probably not. I don't think I'm ready to throw in the towel on campus. I do think that campus, especially for undergrad, is really critical. General, broader community development and socialization of students. However, I do question whether we have the sense of community that professors think they have and that we think we have.
Well, there's a lot of points in there, Rob.
Sorry.
No, nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
I'm going to make one small thing. I think when you said controversial, you actually meant provocative.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
One thing that occurs to me is you mentioned, in effect, in your classes right now, you're using Canvas, of course, as your learning management system, which for most of us, this is a new tool. You're using Zoom for your synchronous activities, which is not built into Canvas. And you're using WhatsApp, in effect, sort of replacing discussion boards. You've got at least 3 different technologies that you're asking the students to engage in. Is that a problem for any of the students? Do they ever feel like, wait, why have I have so many different directions I have to go to follow the course?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. One of the discussions, Chris, that we're having a lot is in our department, should all of our Canvas sites be identically organized so that students can easily find their way through? And I would say absolutely. That's part of a student-centered approach, is to try to create pathways to make it as easy as possible for students to get the assignments, understand the assignments, and post assignments. I think that's one critical part of that.
And by the way, quick plug for our library. They have a standard template that they want us all to be using, but it's been distributed to everyone. Go ahead.
Yep, absolutely. And I think those are important things, and that's part of being student-centered. And I think we have a Canvas session coming up, Chris, where we're going to go through that and actually talk about quick ways and easy ways to lay out for Canvas. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. The students have never objected to the multiple pathways. They seem to enjoy the ability to get connected to me more directly through these technologies, and they really seem to enjoy the fact that they seem to be more honest and more forthright through these different mediums. And I think it's probably worth the different platforms to allow for that multiple layers of interaction and enjoyment. Oh, I said enjoyment, Chris.
That's okay.
Are we allowed to use that word? Okay.
We're supposed to love learning, right?
We are.
What do you do about the student who doesn't participate in WhatsApp?
I never thought about that. I know that they're tacitly taking in all the information. I definitely have students that don't. They don't give me the thumbs up. As long as I get 1 or 2 and I know that I'm engaging, I know the others are seeing the discussions. I don't feel the need for them in something like WhatsApp or Slack to speak up. In the discussion boards, of course, they're expected to all interact. But as you know, introverts can be introverts, and sometimes even on those broader band medias, they're not comfortable speaking. It doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother me that all the folks in here are not talking right now. It doesn't bother me in the slightest.
You're also not letting them talk, so that's...
I know, I don't want them to. Yeah, I like the spotlight, so.
All right, let me move on to another topic, which I know it bothers you hearing about it. But another big concern I've heard from our colleagues relates to academic honesty,
Oh,
particularly in like fact-based courses like a chemistry course or a math course. How do we ensure that students are honestly and accurately representing their learning accomplishments? Yeah, whether it's online or in campus.
yeah. Yeah, Chris, back in the old days, back when we were textile, there was huge cheating scandals. I won't mention the departments. I won't mention,
Mhm.
but many students were thrown out of the school for cheating on campus. So again, I would like folks, what I love about the online discussion is when it harkens back and reflects back on our campus experiences. I think the more we do that, the more we think holistically about the whole picture, the more we're going to build a hybrid model going forward out of this madness that we're in, which is horrible. And I do have empathy for faculty who never taught online, who were thrown into it. I think it's terrible. And I do feel for them, and I'm here to help as much as I can. So Chris, one of the things that I've always wondered is how can you create assignments where it's impossible to cheat?
Mhm.
What kind of learning outcomes can you get to through different pathways? But I think, Chris, you've pointed out that apparently students can pay somebody to write a paper.
Bobby Graziano let us in on the deep, dark secrets of the campus at the
Right.
time.
So Chris, I hate to say this out loud, but I assume that, and gosh, I hate to do this on, and I'm being recorded, but I do know through knowledge of 30, 25 years of teaching that there are students who are cheating. I like to believe that my essay questions are so well developed that nobody outside of my program could ever write those essays, but it is entirely possible and probable that a student has paid somebody to write an essay for my course.
And
I
it
have
could
to
be
come to
someone
grips with that.
inside your program.
I have to come to grips with the fact that some students are always going to find the shortcut, and that there is going to be some cheating. However, I do think in the objectively based courses, the quantitative courses, there are measures that have to be taken to make sure that the student is actually taking these tests, because those tests are part of the assessment. So I can't really speak to that because I don't dwell in that so much, but what I've tried to do, Chris, is find a new pathway of grading that would encourage students to forget about cheating and find so many pathways to learning and so many pathways to getting points. And students are obsessed with points. They still want to get a 4.0, that I've tried to create a new differentiated learning pathway curriculum that allows students to find so much enjoyment in their learning that they no longer even have the idea of cheating. I'm happy to tell you more about that if that's appropriate.
Differentiated learning is a wonderful opportunity for the students and a huge extra burden for the faculty.
Yeah, but you know, I'm a student-centered professor and I will go the extra mile for the students. And I think that's one of the things that makes Jefferson really special, is that we're a teacher-centered university and that the faculty here are more likely to go the extra mile for the students. But with Canvas and with time, I've been able to automate some of these pathways. So Chris, some students don't like to read, some students don't like to write, some students don't like to travel. So some students, so what I want to do is minimize to a minimum level of accomplishment on those and create other pathways. So for example, students can earn extra credit by watching a certain Star Trek episode which talks about social equity. And I
Which one?
found that the one with the half
One with
black face,
Frank
half white
Person?
face,
Yeah, of
where they
course.
were
Yeah,
different on the opposite
yeah,
sides, right?
of course.
And by the way, for all of faculty here, you know, Star Trek pretty much has all of your sustainable development curriculum already built in. So if you want to get some good lessons from TV. But what I found was that, you know, as long as the students are asked to reflect upon what it is they watched and it ties back to the learning objectives that are part of assessment, I'm good. So if a student will write a little bit less or read a little bit less, but still get to the learning objectives through other things. The other part is a lot of students learn through physicality. And so what they want to do is I want to get them out into the world walking around. So I'll have extra credit assignments where they can go to a building and reflect on the sustainability in the building. They're still writing. They forgot that they're writing, by the way, Chris, in the reflection, because they're talking about their experience in the building, right? And so we've done that. And so what's ended up happening is I have 93 points to get an A, but I have 110 available points in my class. So students can get to 93 any way they want, and there are some minimum requirements. There is a midterm. I'm going to make sure I hit all the important assessments. But what the students found was they were gaining like 106 points in my class just because they had so much fun getting it. I had a student come to me last semester and complain that they didn't get a 108 and they deserved a 108 out of 108. And I said, but 93 is an A. So they missed the whole point. I will also admit that last semester, the first student ever abused my model and actually tricked his way through to an A. So this is not an there is a way to fail in this, and I never thought I would see it, but I've started to see it. So now I'm going to adopt the system a little bit differently. Sorry, that was a little longer than I liked, but important.
No problem. I guess you could also just tell them, don't forget you're only cheating yourself.
I mean, that's the implicit point is that that's what I'm trying to get to the students.
All right, let's change back to the faculty now. So
Yeah.
What about faculty who feel that they don't have the skills to succeed in an online teaching environment?
They don't. They're going to fail at first. They're going to learn by doing. So those faculty who probably learned how to swim in a very awkward way are probably really good swimmers now and probably can do the breaststroke and the backstroke and the American crawl. Is it the American crawl? It's the crawl. So there's all these different strokes. There's somebody help me out in the chat box. Point being is that everybody in this room was a terrible swimmer. And some of us, and I hated this, were thrown into the pool and just started swimming because they had to swim. Others, they had their dad or mom or uncle or aunt hold them in place and help them swim, right? And that's sort of what your job is, Chris, right? You're sort of, as the IT folks, I don't know what, integrated learning or whatever your term is, you're helping people swim and not just crash and burn. But everybody eventually became good swimmers. And some people actually enjoy swimming, Chris. They actually go to a pool and they swim laps. And that takes a couple of years. I mean, it is going to take 2 to 3 years of consistent online teaching and learning before you really feel comfortable and where you have multiple techniques that are effective.
Donna tells us that the butterfly is the one thing you were thinking of.
That was it.
And I was just going to point out that my metaphor typically is about learning how to play your scales so that you can play a song, but it's the same idea.
Although I'm not so sure. I've never learned how to play an instrument very well, but I'll take your word for it.
But you can swim.
I can.
All right, Rob, so we're getting near the end here. One last question for you.
Yep.
If we manage to pull off a successful online semester this fall, are we in effect saying that there's no benefit to on-campus teaching? Is this part of the grand conspiracy that lets us eliminate classroom buildings and save operating costs?
Yeah, Chris, I'm conflicted on this because I feel like I'm part of the actual progress that's going to destroy higher ed. For example,
you love conspiracies too.
And I do love conspiracies, and I do think that the dilemma we face right now is the Wall Streetization of higher ed is a very dangerous road to go. I think higher ed is one of the last utopias in the world, and the higher ed system itself, which does not have dollars as the primary metric, is one of the last things that can actually keep some sanity in this world and keep us from moving to a completely profit-driven world. So on the one hand, I'm conflicted because I'm contributing to that by teaching a free course, for gosh sakes. That's the worst thing that we could be doing, right? On the other hand, I have 322 students learning about sustainability all over the world and learning about Jefferson. So I'm torn on this. And I do think that we have to worry about this, Chris. I do think that is why I talked a lot today about us reflecting on our campus experiences. We've got to use this online experience to make our on-campus experiences so amazing and so valuable that we don't lose this magical thing called higher ed that's been created over these years. And I do think there is a bit of conspiracy, and I do think that we can ultimately get out of this, but I'm actually conflicted and nervous right now. I'm not going to give you a rosy prognostication on this one, I'm sorry to say.
So are you telling us that there are some reasons students have to be on campus? Barry threw out in the chat box psychomotor skills and competencies.
Yeah.
Can we completely eliminate the physical university and just have online universities, or is there a reason we should not?
No, we can do it, but we shouldn't. I do think that undergraduate education on campus serves many, many important societal benefits, and it would be terrible if this ever went away 100%. At the graduate level though, Chris, I'm a little bit more flexible, knowing that, people are working, people have kids, we got to create pathways for folks that don't have the privileges that everybody has. You know, a campus education is not there for everyone. So the online also does bring in some social equity opportunities that we need to think about. I do think we need it, Chris. And I'm not proposing at all that we get rid of it. I'm hoping that this online experience actually makes the on-campus experience better. And yes, I think there is a way to teach glass blowing online. I just haven't figured it out yet.
It reminds me back in the day when we used to play basketball. Remember we had a faculty versus staff game one time for the Gallagher Cup?
We did.
And I didn't really know how to play basketball, and Matt Dunn taught me on a whiteboard, and then I played that night. So you can learn some things by accident, Donna. It's certainly possible. All right, well, we've hit our time limit here, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed listening to our expert, Professor Rob Fleming. Please join us for the next podcast next month and visit our Facebook page. Until then, this has been your host, Chris Pastore. And
this is Rob Fleming saying, better living through sustainability.
And we're wishing you the best of success through this COVID semester. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Awkward silence as everybody leaves.
Yes, well, we got some nice feedback here.
We did. Hey, Karen was here. That's always good.
We had a couple of outsiders, Rick Sayers from Newman University and Ruth Akenbaum from Penn Charter.
I love it, guys. Did a great job. Great job.
Cool.
Really. I was engaged, and you didn't even get into grading. I was ready for Chris to get that whole thing done, the grading thing.
We almost got there, Chris.
You can probably turn off the recording, Rob. But this is Rob's show, not mine. So